What if I told you there's a simple VBA hack that can unlock all your Excel sheets in seconds, even when you don't know the passwords? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what this secret VBA hack is and how it can save you hours of frustration. But first, let me show you how to do something similar without VBA, so you don't have to use any scary code. The standard way to apply worksheet protection is to click on the Review tab and then click on Protect Sheet. I'll add a password, in this case 123, click OK, then confirm the password 123 and click OK. Notice I can't insert any columns and I can't edit the cells. We unprotect the sheet by clicking on Unprotect Sheet and entering the password. Now I can insert columns and edit the cells. But what if we want to unprotect 10 sheets? Do you have to click on each sheet and go through the menu to unprotect and do it every single sheet, one at a time? No, it turns out there's a quicker way that works in Excel 365. Just click on File and then click on Info, and you'll see this section called Protect Workbook. You see the list of all the sheets where there's a password that protects the sheet. So we can now unprotect each sheet and enter a password. And you can see which sheets are still protected. But it's slow and tedious because you have to unprotect each sheet separately. We can definitely do better. Let's turn to VBA. This stands for Visual Basic for Applications, and it's a free built-in programming language that gives us a simple way to automate Excel. First, you need to make sure you have the Developer tab showing. If you don't see it in your ribbon, just right-click on one of the menu names and click on Customize the ribbon. Now on the right-hand side, you'll see there is a line that says Developer. Make sure it's checked. So you see this green check symbol. Then click OK. And now we have this new Developer tab with all these different buttons. Let's go click on the Visual Basic button. Here is the Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications editor. What we'll do is insert a new code module into our workbook. So this is the current workbook. I'm going to right-click somewhere on one of the sheets, hover over Insert, and then click on Module. So what that's done is inserted a new code module called Module 1. And this is going to be the home for our new code. We can rename it to something else that's more friendly. In this case, I'll call it Protection. Hit Enter. And we can automatically apply a password to every sheet in the active workbook with a few lines of VBA code. First, we're going to create a subroutine that will mark the beginning of our code. When I hit Enter, you're going to see the end sub, which marks the end of the code. Everything in the middle is what we're going to run. The first thing we'll do is declare a couple of variables. These variables are storage containers for, in this case, a worksheet object, and in this case, a string. So whenever you see WS in the code, it's going to refer to a worksheet object that we define later. And whenever you see PWD, which stands for password, that's going to contain a string. The first line of actual code here defines the string, so password PWD equals the characters 1, 2, 3. And that's the password we'll use to protect our sheets. Now I'll go to the next line. What we'll have to do now is loop through each worksheet in the active workbook. We're going to use a for each loop to do that. So what this is saying is for each WS, which stands for worksheet, for each WS in the active workbook, which is the one that we selected here, and in the .worksheets collection, which represents all of the worksheets in the active workbook, this is what we're going to do. What this means is for that worksheet, we will protect it and we'll apply the password pwd. So note there is a colon and equals, define the value of this parameter. And that's all we want to do. So we're going to close the for next loop with a next ws. So that means it tells Excel to go through each worksheet in the active workbook's worksheets and apply protection with the password pwd. And that pwd refers to the string 123. Every workbook is ending up with the password 123. Last of all, we're going to add a message box just to tell the user that all worksheets in the active workbook have been protected with the password 123. Let's run the code by clicking on the green play triangle. See, it's busy running. Now it's told us that all worksheets in the active workbook have been protected with the password 123. We'll click on OK. Now if I click on, let's say, sheet 1, and I try to edit the cell, you see the cell or chart that you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. We'll click on OK. That means I can't insert any rows and columns, or I can't delete them, and I can't change any of the cells. Now we could go and unprotect the sheets individually, 1, 2, 3, and then that means we can edit the cells. But as you can see here, there are 100 sheets in this workbook, and if we're going to do that manually, it will take a very long time. So instead, we're going to use a VBA macro that unprotects the sheets. So I'm going to click on Developer, and then Visual Basic. That brings up the Visual Basic editor. And inside this module, which we've called Protection, we're going to create a new subroutine. So this subroutine is called Unprotect all worksheets in the active workbook. So it's pretty much the same as the previous one. We declare the variables, we set password to be 123, and then we loop through each worksheet in the active workbook. So the only difference is that we're going to unprotect instead of protect. So every time it loops through and chooses a worksheet in the active workbook's worksheets, we're going to unprotect with the password pwd, which is set to 123. Now I'm going to run this by clicking inside it and then clicking on the play button. Now it says all worksheets in the active workbook have been unprotected. We'll click OK. Then we'll test that by going to, say, sheet 8, and then changing this to, say, the number 1, pressing Control Enter. And you see I can edit sheet 8. I can also edit sheet 10 if I insert a column. There we go, we can do that. And I can also delete this shape if I wanted to. This works great when you can set the password. But what if you don't know the password? Maybe you set the password a few months ago and can't remember it. Or you're working on a spreadsheet from someone who left the company last year but forgot to share the password with you. It can be so frustrating when this happens. So what can we do? We can turn to some advanced VBA. You need to think about removing Excel protection as using a map to find ancient treasure that's hidden in a temple which is guarded by puzzles and traps. And there's 5 stages to get the treasure and unlock your workbook. The first stage is to use the map to identify the location of the temple. In Excel, this means choosing the Excel workbook we want to unlock. I'm going to show you the code in a new workbook. You'll find a link to download it in the description. So don't worry about typing out the code. All the VBA will be in the download. Let's click on Developer and then Visual Basic. There's too much code for me to go into detail on every line, so I'll give you an outline of how it works. You can study the code in the downloadable workbook. Also, I recommend you check out my full Excel VBA course that turns beginners into coders. It's helped people like Kenneth master VBA faster than they thought possible. The link for my course is in the description. Let's start at the top. We have a subroutine called Remove Excel Protection. Here, we're going to declare all the variables that we'll use later. These will be the named containers that will hold all the objects, text, and numbers that we need in the program. Next, we're going to use some code to open a file dialog, allowing the user to browse the computer and select a file. This line creates a file dialog box. This line ensures the user can only select one file at a time, and this one sets the title of the dialog box to guide the user on what to do. Next, we're going to handle file selection. First line checks if the user selected a file. If file dialog.show equals -1, then they have. If the user cancels a dialog, doesn't pick a file, the code skips these steps and exits the subroutine here. If the user does select a file, then selected full file name saves the full path and name of the selected file into this variable. After that, we want to check if the selected file is an XML-based Excel file. If it isn't, then we need to exit. So this bit here extracts the file extension from the selected file and converts it to lowercase using the lcase function. The mid function extracts a portion of the string starting from the position of the last period, which is found using inStringRev. This way it grabs the file extension, for example, XLSX or XLSM. This if statement checks whether the file extension is one of the allowed types, and if it isn't, it shows a message box telling the user to select correct file type and exits the subroutine. But if the file type is right, it moves on to the next step. So in the final part, we're going to get the folder path, file extension, and file name from the selected file. The first line, selected file path, extracts the folder path where the selected file is located. It does this by taking everything before the last backslash in the file's full path. Selected file name extracts the name of the selected file with the extension. First, it grabs everything after the folder path, and then it removes the extension by taking everything to the left of the last period. So we'll use these variables later. The second stage is to enter the temple and get safely past the corridors and traps leading to the treasure. In Excel, this stage is about making a copy of our original Excel workbook as a new zip file and extracting the XML contents into a temporary folder. Modern Excel files are saved with an extension of XLSX, XLSM, XLTX, and XLTM. They store data in something called the OpenXML format. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's a tool for storing data that is software and hardware independent. We'll start with our Excel file. Then we'll copy it into a zip file to keep the original intact. Then we extract the contents so that we can get access to the XML data. Then we take out the right parts of the XML to remove the protection. Let's have a look at the VBA. First, we need to create a unique folder name. We'll generate this using the current date and time to ensure the folder we create doesn't conflict with any existing files. This will result in a folder that looks like this: temp --2024, which is the year, -08 for the month, -31 for the day, /13 for the hour, 15 for the minutes, and 0 for the seconds. And then the zip file will be .zip. Next, we're going to copy and rename the original file to a zip file with a unique name. This file copy command copies the selected file full name to the new file full name, which we defined up here. We've also got some error handling to ensure that if something goes wrong, like the file being opened, then the code shows this error message and it stops. Now, we create a new folder to store the contents of the zip file. This folder will be used to hold all the extracted files. Finally, we use the Windows Shell application to extract the contents of the zip file into the newly created folder. So new zip file path is the folder, and this shellapp.namespace new file full name.items are all the items that will be copied into that folder. This lets us modify them as needed. The third stage is to solve the temple puzzles and unlock the treasure. In Excel, this stage is about removing workbook and worksheet protection from the XML files that we extracted in stage 2. There are 3 types of protection we'll remove with our code. In addition to unlocking worksheet protection, we'll also remove workbook and file modification protection, since we can use the same technique for all 3. Here's the VBA. It's split into 3 parts. The first removes sheet protection, the second removes workbook protection, and the third removes file sharing or file modification protection. First, we'll remove worksheet protection. To prevent people from changing, moving, or deleting data in a worksheet, you can lock the cells on your Excel worksheet and then protect the sheet with a password. Now I'll first show you what it looks like to do this by hand. Then we'll come back to the code. Here I have a sample protected workbook. The first stage in our process was to select a workbook. In this case, we've selected this one. The second stage was to create a copy in a zip file, which is here, and then extract those files here. Let me double click to enter this folder. So this is what's inside. We can actually read it with the folders and files. So we're going to double click into the XL folder and then into the worksheets folder, and we see one XML file for every sheet. I'm going to open sheet1.xml and show you where the worksheet protection is. So I'll right click, then click open with, and then click on Notepad. This is what the XML looks like. So we need to search for a very specific tag, which is sheet protection. That word sheet protection is inside angled brackets. So here you see the left angle bracket. And I'm going to highlight this with the keyboard. We have to find all the way to the next angle bracket, which is the closing right angle bracket. And if we're doing this by hand, we just delete all of these lines like this, save that as a file. And that's what this bit of the VBA code does. It loops through each XML file in the \xl\worksheets folder of the unzipped file. It looks for this tag, sheet protection. Everywhere it finds that, it removes the whole tag. Now, the way it does this is it calls a separate subroutine. Here's that separate subroutine, and there are 3 steps to it. First is to read the text of the file into a variable. In this case, we have it reading into file content. Step 2 is to remove the protection settings from the XML content. It does that by changing what's inside file content, and it uses a function here called remove_protection_tag. It feeds that the file content as it is now and the tag name that we want to delete. And then it replaces the file content with the new output. So this function is called remove_protection_tag. It has 2 inputs. One is XML content and the other is tag name. So basically it looks inside for that left angular bracket and the tag name, and it looks for the closing tag, which is defined by / and the right angular bracket. Then it replaces the tag with a blank. So that's the equivalent of us deleting the tag by hand. And finally, it sets the result of the function to be equal to that new content without the tag. So when we go back up here, that file content is now tagless. We need to write the modified content back to the XML file in step 3. Then we come back here and loop through the rest of the files in the XL\worksheets folder. And that removes the worksheet protection for all of the worksheets. Next, we'll remove workbook structure protection. To prevent other users from viewing hidden worksheets, adding, moving, deleting, or hiding worksheets, and renaming worksheets, you can protect the structure of your Excel workbook with a password. You do it like this. Click on the Review tab, and then go find Protect Workbook. Click on that, then enter a password, in this case 123. Click OK. Re-enter the password 123. Click on OK. And now you see if I click on the plus, normally it will add a new sheet. It doesn't matter how many times I click on it, there is no sheet added. And I can try to right click on a tab. You see I can't insert, delete, rename, move or copy. Can't change the tab color, hide or unhide. And the only way to allow those functions to come back is to unprotect the workbook. So I click here and then enter the password 123, click OK. Now if I right click on the tab, you see I can do all those functions again. So what our code will do is go into this folder with the extracted XML files, and then it will go into the XL folder, and then it will find this XML file which is called workbook.xml. I'm now going to open it, right click, open with Notepad. So this is the workbook XML. We're looking for the workbook protection tag. So if you notice by hand, it's pretty hard to find this. It's possible to do it by hand, but it's much easier to do it by the VBA code. So we're going to select from the left angle bracket all the way down, including the workbook protection, to the next / and right angle bracket, and delete that. And that's all this line of VBA does. It looks for that tag workbook protection and removes it. Then it saves back to the workbook.xml file. Finally, we can remove file modification protection. To prevent others from making any modifications to a file, you can set a password to modify the file or even a password to open the file. Now, the file open password is the most secure setting and our VBA code can't unlock it. But the password to modify a file can be removed with our code. Here's how you set a password to protect against modifications to the file. Click on File, then Save As, and in More Options, you can select from Tools and click on General Options. You can set the password to open, which we can't break with VBA code. You can also set the password to modify, which we can remove with our VBA code. So let's set that to 123 and click OK. So let me open this protected sample workbook. When the file modify password has been set, you can choose to open as read-only, which means you can't make any edits, or you can enter the file modify password 123 to unlock it and make changes to the file. So if we want to remove file modify password, this is what we have to do. Inside our extracted files, we go into the Excel folder here. Then we open the workbook XML file as before. So this is the workbook.xml file. We're looking for this keyword, file sharing. We're going to remove the tag that begins with open angle bracket file sharing, and that goes all the way to / close angle bracket, and delete that. So once we delete that, that removes the file modify password. And that is what this single line of VBA code does. It looks for that keyword file sharing, and it removes the tag that contains the keyword file sharing and saves it back into the workbook.xml. Now that we've successfully removed 3 different types of password protection in the XML, we need to put the edited XML into a zip file. That brings us to stage 4 of our temple adventure. We have the treasure, and we need to carefully secure it and leave the temple. In Excel terms, we are repackaging the edited XML files into a new zip file. Remember stage 2 when we created the XML files? Now we're going backwards from the XML files to the zip file. The first stage is to create a new empty zip file, replacing the previously copied file, which is a temporary renamed version of the original Excel file. Here, we're going to open a new zip file, which is called new file full name. for writing. And so this line here, don't worry about too much of the details, but print #1, character 80, and so on, 75, 5, 6, and string 18. That's just the necessary headers to initialize a zip file. Next, we're going to move the files into the zip file. So we're using the Windows Shell application, and this is going to repackage the contents of the expanded and edited XML files into the new file full name, which is a new zip file. And this next stage here is just to ensure that the compressing is complete. We need to check that all the files have been moved before we head on to the next bit of code. So we have a do until loop here, which compares the number of files inside the zip file with the number of files inside the temporary folder which we've edited. So if the items count doesn't match, we'll wait for 1 second, and then we'll check again. Once they do match, the loop exits and we can continue to the next stage. We're almost there. We have one final stage to go. We'll make our triumphant exit from the temple with our treasure, ensuring we leave nothing behind. In Excel, this means deleting our temporary files and folders and changing the zip file into the original Excel file format. So now we have the zip file. We're going to clean up the temporary folders and files and convert the zip file into an Excel file with the same extension as the original file. To delete the temporary files and folders created during the subroutine, we're going to set the file system object equals create object scripting.filesystemObject, and with that file system object we're going to apply this method .delete folder. So delete folder, it will delete the selected file path and new folder name, which is our temporary folder. Then we're going to rename the final zip file back to an Excel file using the selected file extension from earlier. And it's going to do that in the format with the date and time added at the end. So what this will look like is file name --year -month -day 13 for the hours, 15 for the minutes, and 30 for the seconds. Then the final stage is to notify the user that the protection has been removed. You just use a message box that says the workbook and worksheet protection passwords have been removed. So now, to give you a demo of it, I have a sample protected workbook that has all 3 levels of protection applied to it. We'll now go into the subroutine, remove Excel protection, and run it by clicking on this green play button. The first stage is to select the file, this sample protected workbook. We'll click OK. When it's finished, it will tell us the workbook and worksheet protection passwords have been removed. So when I click OK, we see we have a new workbook with the date stamp 2024 08 31 13 50 30. And if I open it by double clicking, you see it doesn't ask me for a password to modify the file. I can also add new sheets, and I can modify without needing to enter any worksheet protection password. So now you know the secret hack to bypass Excel protection with VBA, but it's only one of hundreds of tricks that could save you hours of work. I put together a list of my top 30 tips and tricks that are total game changers you don't want to miss. Watch this video next to learn how to save even more time with Excel.